Ball pythons have a lot of genetic diversity, and this manifests itself in colors and patterns. But unfortunately, there are a few instances where it manifests itself in a less desirable way. We're going to take a look at these defects today, which morphs exhibit them, and if they're actually really a major problem or not. The number one defect or issue that you can get in a ball python, and it is probably the most talked about one, although I personally don't believe it should be, would be the wobble. The wobble is basically something that causes the snake to maybe shudder a little bit or stutter back and forth, especially if they kind of raise their head. In some cases, this can manifest as a corkscrew, is what they call it, where the snake is moving through the air very wildly, which would almost look interesting if it wasn't obvious that this is not something that a snake should be doing. This in the past has been largely thought of as a neurological issue. I'll get back to that soon. First off, let's talk about what morphs can exhibit this. Obviously, the most famous one for having a wobble would be the spider gene. In fact, if you ask most people, they would probably say that spider's the only one that you ever need to watch out for. But that's not true. Champagne can show it. When you breed two copies of spot nose for what is called a powerball, these snakes, which are normally perfectly fine and exhibit no wobble, will suddenly have a wobble roughly about the same as a spider. And there's more evidence of other genes being bred together creating this wobble as well. So I always wonder why people just focus on the spider. Probably because it was one of the first that exhibited these signs, and therefore it's easy to just point the fingers at it. But there are other ones that have it. It's also not proven yet that adding any other genetics into the mix would lessen the wobble, although people are trying to do so still. And back to that neurological issue. Well, it doesn't seem like that might be the case anymore. In fact, a lot of recent studies have proven that spiders have an inner ear defect, which would, of course, affect their sense of balance. Now, whether this makes it better or worse is up to the eye of the beholder, I suppose, because the wobble still exists. Is it a major issue? No, I don't think it's a major issue. There is no evidence to prove that these snakes are in any pain. They're still able to eat fine, although it is something that I think people should be made aware of. And they should be able to make their own educated decision on whether they want to keep a spider. If you watch our videos, you know that I do have two. One by complete happenstance and accident because it happens to be in my all-white snake, so I didn't know that. But the other one was a while back. I got a clown spider because it had spider in it. It had a bit of a discount to it. So they are a little bit cheaper. Do I plan to continue getting spiders? No. I actually never have really fallen in love with the morph. It does a lot, but that's the problem, is it does a lot. It kind of takes the pattern and changes it up, and it overpowers when you're trying to breed it into other things. It really just takes the cake and runs with it. The next genetic issue that we're going to discuss is kinking. Typically when a snake is born, if you were ever able to get the snake to actually stretch out straight, you should be able to run your finger down the snake's spine and feel no deviation. It should just be a straight bumpy ride down. A kink is when there's a deviation in that, and the severity can vary wildly. In fact, some kinks are so small it's not even noteworthy. Sometimes it's just at the very edge of the tail. You just have a slight deviation, a slight curve, and sometimes it is heart-wrenchingly horrible, and it will result in the death of the snake once it's born. They are able to survive for whatever reason while they're being fed through the umbilical cord, so to speak, but actually eating and consuming food is impossible. You're gonna have to make the decision to call this snake, because if you don't, it'll just starve to death, and that's more torture than just ending its life humanely, in my opinion. We have seen this. Unfortunately, we've never been on the good end of a kink, one that can live, one that you're able to sell or just give away to someone who knows how to take care of it as maybe what I'd call a pet-only snake, because it just shouldn't be bred. Quite often kinks are not genetic. Sometimes they're due to incubation issues. Sometimes they're just random facts of life. But what genetics bring it out? The most common morphs that genetically can influence whether a kink happens or not would be to a lesser extent caramel albino, at least the visual ones. I have heard mixed results on how much this is, or even if it is. I've heard plenty of people who work the caramel albino gene say that they've never had an issue. But it is information that is out there, and there's probably a reason for it. But if you weren't breeding visual to visual, I've heard that this is not as common. If you breed a visual to a het or a het to a het, this does not typically occur. Again, this is information that is out there, but I don't believe there's enough of it to prove that this is for sure. But the most common ones that are known for kinking, at least when it comes to genetics, would be the super cinnamons and the super black pastels. This specific one was discovered quite a bit when trying to make panda pieds, which is a super black pastel pied, and they're absolutely gorgeous. However, I wouldn't say more often than not. In fact, it's still a lower than likely chance that you're going to get kinking. It's still higher than most other morphs. And again, black pastel by itself, cinnamon by itself, they're perfectly fine. They're beautiful morphs in and of themselves. Just when they're creating the super form, it can cause this kinking. They're still bred to this day, but it can happen. So it's something that people who decide to do this should be prepared for. So is kinking a major issue? Well, I think that one goes without saying. Yes, it is a big punch in the gut. This one is not just something I think should just kind of be told to somebody and taken with a grain of salt. If you're going to breed snakes that could cause kinking, even if it's just a little bit more prevalent, you should understand that you are taking a chance of creating a snake that's gonna have to be culled, because that's the reality of it. Our next genetic issue is a really, really weird one. And that would be the fact that the gender of a certain morph can actually affect what gender the babies are. There is only one morph that does this, although it goes by two different names, and that would be the banana or the coral glow gene. The sex chromosome for a banana ball python or a coral glow is attached to the genetic markers that create the banana in the first place. If you have a female banana ball python, you'll get banana males and you'll get banana females. If you have a banana male ball python whose father was also a banana ball python, they will give birth almost exclusively to male banana ball pythons. Everything else in that clutch that is not banana will inherently be female almost exclusively. The males that come from a female banana ball python can give birth to just females, and then all of the non-bananas will be males. Not confusing at all, right? But is it dangerous? Only to your brain, because this is a very confusing gene when it comes to genetics around the gender, and there's still debate to this day, and I see people argue about it way more than they should. Can we all just agree that it's very, very confusing, but very, very beautiful? Also, harmless. This is a completely safe quirk. I guess it's an issue to breeders because it can be very frustrating, and it was very frustrating when these first bananas came in and everyone was wondering, why the hell can't I hit a female ball python so I can continue making these and create a super banana? And don't even get me started on the super banana and how all of that works. Next up would be weird eye issues, whether they're large eyes, small eyes, or maybe even no eyes. Now, genetically, the no eyes thing is not really anything genetically related. It's more or less an incubator issue or just a random thing that occur, and these snakes can often live healthy lives, although they usually need help eating right off the bat, but they usually can live healthy lives. But large eyes, bug eyes, and small eyes, those can be a little more genetic, especially bug eyes. The most common one is the super lesser. The super lesser, just 2 copies of the lesser gene, creates a blue-eyed Lucy, and it's considered one of the nicest looking ones. It's a very white snake with very bright blue eyes. And maybe they're so bright because they're so darn big. They are bug-eyed in most cases, not always. The super lesser that we have here happens to have larger than normal eyes. It's also known to manifest in lesser or butter piebald combos and in super cinnamons or super black pastels as well. But is this issue really an issue? I would say no. There's no evidence to prove that they have any effect on their eyesight for the better or worse, and I'd say that there's really no issue. They just have a bit bigger eyes. It's kind of almost goofy looking, almost alien-ish, which is why some people do kind of like it. But again, I just don't see anything that could be caused for harm with the specific genetic issue that arises. Next up would be issues that affect the fertility of a female. This can be a mixed bag. Obviously, as a breeder, this only affects you. As a pet owner, it makes really no difference at all, as long as you're not going to breed it. What we're talking about here is the ability for the females to reproduce. And there's different severities depending on the morphs. So in a way, this is a little bit more of a complex problem. Let's talk about one we just talked about. Caramel albinos are known to have possibly some subfertility issues, is what they call it, meaning that they will breed, they will lay eggs, although it is reported that they produce a higher amount of slugs than, well, other morphs. Is this harmful to the snake? No, but it's harmful to the breeder if he's going to put it to an animal that he wants and he hopes that he gets a lot of great results out of, and half the clutch slugs out. This can be frustrating. However, I've heard mixed reports on this. People say that their caramel albinos are perfectly fine. It goes back to, I think, what I mentioned earlier. More people seem to have issues when breeding caramel albino to caramel albino, to visuals to visuals, not when it's visual to het or het to het, or if you're just going to have the caramel albino and breed it to something completely different, not even going for the caramel albinos. Again, those aren't completely proven theories either, but it isn't as big of an issue as what we're about to talk about. And that would be genes that cause the females to die if you breed them. And to date, there's only one gene that I know of that does this, and it is called the desert gene, not desert ghost. You might be thinking that's what I was referring to, but I am not. The desert morph, in a way, is similar to the desert ghost. It brightens the snake a little bit, cleans it up, gives it a little bit of a ghostly pattern even, which is where some of that confusion at one point came in. However, the desert morph, when people started breeding them, they got excited. They get this morph, you get the males, especially if they pass the gene on, you get a female, you try to breed that to create maybe a super, and, well, your female gets egg bound and dies. Probably just a coincidence, right? Nope, all of the females get egg bound and die. I would say that the desert morph is effectively the only morph that there's very little controversy about. It is a dead morph for all intents and purposes. Now, you can find them occasionally on Morph Market, although they're almost always het only. The males can be bred, but the females can never ever be bred. They will get egg bound and they will die, and it is very wretched to lose an animal in this way. Ours that we lost was not egg bound. It actually passed its eggs and, well, partially, and then it ruptured its uterus and died. But either way, no chance that I could ever say anything good about a morph that could possibly pass that sort of pain along. Is this an issue? Well, yes, in both cases, but in very different severities. The caramel albino, for example, I don't think is as big of an issue because it's realistically just the chance of getting more slugs, and that is somewhat refuted in some cases. There's a lot of different back and forth that I hear on that, but in the case of the desert gene, stay away. There are a few people that work with it and they're more or less just experimenting, I'd say. They're trying to fix it in some ways, but they don't breed the females. But in general, almost everyone watching this, stay away from that morph. You would think that that would be the number one thing on this list I'd say to stay away from, but there are others, and we're getting into that next. The next combos that I'd say stay away from are things that you really got to create yourself. You can't buy them. There's a reason for that. They're called fatal combos. That is because when you breed these two animals together, if you hit the right genetics, that snake dies. Some of the combos that we're talking about here would be spider to spider, obviously, but other spider complex genes like spider to champagne or super champagnes, these can cause snakes that die. They'll be born possibly, they might be alive. You might think, I got one, it's alive, and then it's gonna die within hours, if maybe not days at best. These are snakes that you should never breed. It is irresponsible to breed these two snakes together. I can't think of very many good reasons. Someone might say research. That's pretty messed up research, and you best have a good payout if you're gonna do that, like curing some massive disease or stopping it from happening altogether. And if you're going to breed and deal with any of these genes, you need to familiarize yourself with it because it could be more common than you'd think that maybe you might make a mistake. With that being said, there are some people out there that claim to have hit the super spider and had it live. And I've also heard people still to this day say that the super spider isn't even possible. I can't say for certain in terms of my own personal experience because I'm never going to do that. So that rounds out the list of the more common ball python issues that are at least connected to genetics. If you'd like to see some videos on some of the topics we talked about today, you can actually watch those videos right here and here.